This is a big week for Senate confirmation hearings. On Wednesday, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for HHS Secretary. Then on Thursday, we'll see Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and Kash Patel for FBI Director. Chris Bedford explained in his latest Beltway brief how this will almost certainly lead to Republican infighting, and he joins us now to discuss. So, Bedford, how are these nominations going to spark all this GOP infighting?
So the Democrats really only have one major target on this, and that's Kash Patel. He's as Trumpy as they get. He literally wrote a Trump children's book about the impeachment efforts called "The Plot to Overthrow the King" or something like that. He's also someone who's been instrumental in exposing some of the corruption inside of the FBI and the Department of Justice. That was when he was in the House of Representatives. So while he's got the most momentum behind him, largely full Republican support, they're going to try and target him. Democrats are and take him down, and they're less interested and Tulsi Gabbard, who is a former Democrat rising star and someone who Democrat voters still aren't really super upset about. And then you've got RFK, who has even his more outside of the box ideas are the kind of ideas that have been held by a lot of upper middle class Democrat households for a long time. So he's not a major target. Their enemies are within the GOP. The neocon conservatives and the hawks who are suspicious of Tulsi Gabbard don't like anyone who has any kind of independent thinking about what the blob's up to. And also people who are suspicious of RFK. He's faced a completely disingenuous attacks from the right, funded by Mike Pence's group, claiming that it's all about being pro-life. Now, he's got an interesting conversion story about coming back to God. And he's said a lot of pro-abortion things in his life, but he's also made clear to the U.S. Senate that in this role, he will execute the president's vision on abortion. So it's not really Mike Pence trying to come in here and stand up for babies. It's Mike Pence trying to sink a Donald Trump nominee who's outside of the mainstream on some of his views, although they're becoming more increasingly mainstream. So those are the two nominees this week who I think are in more trouble. They're going to have a harder path, and that's not because of Democrats, even though, of course, Democrats aren't going to vote for them, but it's because of the Republicans who might flake off.
Chris, I want to get back to the Republicans because that's of main interest, I think, to us. But when we look at the Democrats and Kash Patel, I guess there's two answers to why they're so. Well, there's probably more, but why they're so against him, right? One is, well, he's going to be effective and he's going to be, a fighter and belligerent. The other one that strikes me is that maybe there's a lot more to hide. Maybe there's a lot more at stake when it comes to the FBI, given what we all just lived through. And that's still a point of vulnerability. In other words, it's a defense mechanism rather than so much being, they know he's a fighter, but there's a lot of fighters. What are your thoughts on that?
That's totally true. He, in an outside role, working for Devin Nunes in the House of Representatives, was able to uncover huge misdeeds within the Department of Justice. And that's something the Trump administration has been working hard to do. You see the CIA is now openly investigating whether or not China intentionally was behind COVID. Whereas previously, under a more partisan Democrat-leading CIA, we were told, hey, don't worry about it. It didn't happen. And even if it did, it's old news or it's fake or it's exaggerated. So he's the Trump administration is working to actually uncover a lot more of the sins of the deep state once they're actually in there and inside. And I know that Kash Patel's people have been working closely with former FBI agents who saw this up front and personal in their years of service, who witnessed the politicization, who saw every single case the FBI was working on, whether it was child sex trafficking, whether it was foreign spies, whether it was organized crime, was put on the back burner so the FBI could be politicized and end up putting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in prison over January 6th. It reminds me of Bonnie and Clyde back in the day. The way the DOJ had this massive investigation of J6 reminds me of when organized crime was running whole American cities, but J. Edgar Hoover was sending hundreds of agents to catch Bonnie and Clyde and get the newspapers. Didn't want to actually talk about the real issues that were going on in the country or tackle them because of corruption, because of fear, because it was difficult. Kash Patel is someone who's going to try and reverse course on that. So the Democrats are going to try and use J6 against him. They're going to try and ask him questions like, do you support attacks on law enforcement, trying to tie him to pardons and commutations for those people who are convicted of attacks on law enforcement? And he's going to have to come back at them and tell the Democrats, and Republicans will be watching this, because there are still Republican senators, I'm convinced, who check under their bed at night to make sure J6 isn't in there. They're so afraid of this subject. And Kash Patel's going to have to say, I'm going to prosecute people who attack law enforcement, or I'm going to arrest them. The DOJ, it's up to them to prosecute this. And then it's going to be up to the president and his prerogative whether or not those people will be pardoned. And just try to toe that line in a way that makes Republicans still feel comfortable.
Well, Chris, Donald Trump has been president for exactly 1 whole week now. I want to know just your thoughts kind of looking back on what we've seen, because we know that Donald Trump, when he's standing up for the American people, is when he's at his best. And we've seen a lot of that already in just 7 days.
It's been incredible. And it's been such a repudiation of what you always hear from Washington, that these things can't be done, that you can't change these things, that the president isn't able to just stop illegal immigration and slow it down or deport people. We have to look at the root causes. I mean, this fight with Colombia is straight up like a plot line out of the Young Pope series, where the president comes in and says, actually, I do have the power to handle this. What are you talking about? Colombia is not accepting people. Raise the tariffs to 25% immediately. In 1 week, raise them to 50%, and take away the visas of all diplomatic staff. It's over. And they'll see who's actually in charge. Now, you can hear the State Department shrieking, because the State Department of the last 50 years, basically, considers themselves ambassadors for the foreign countries to America. You're constantly hearing, well, that wouldn't be in Colombia's interest. That wouldn't help. Well, who cares? You work for the United States. That's their ambassador's job to seek the interests of Colombia. Ours is to seek the interests of the United States, and repatriating your citizens is in the interests of the U.S.
You know, we talk a lot about shifting the Overton window rhetorically, by which we mean someone says something that was, controversial last year, but now it's not controversial anymore because people start talking about it openly. This is like that. It's the Overton window, but for the use of power, right? I mean, it's like an operational Overton window where you see, so this is what the question is. You see Republicans hopefully going, oh, you can just, as I said on Twitter, you can just sign things. You can just do this. You can just tell the Colombians, like, no, actually, you like the tariff. You don't like tariffs, do you? Yeah, I didn't think so. Let's move on. And you just start achieving goals by using what power you have. And many people on the right, myself included, you and others, have all been criticized for saying, like, oh, you're a bunch of fascists because you want the president to use executive power according to the Constitution. I don't know. It's almost as if, right, the right has been psyoped into thinking any use of power is bad, okay? We can't do that, and hand-wringing. So is this going to change things, do you think, though? I mean, are people paying attention? Is it having an impact in the minds of the kinds of people who are in power and enmeshed in it?
Yes, because courage is contagious, as we all know. People see this and they say, well, I could do that. And then they join in and they want to be a part of it. More so, the base is seeing it. American voters see it. These mealy-mouthed, well, immigration's an act of love, and it's a difficult, complicated question. No, it's not. And when you can simplify this and cut straight through to it and say we're going to protect Americans first, then it makes it more difficult for politicians to get mealy-mouthed. And despite the fact that these people are elected to be leaders, so many of them are actually just followers. They go with where they think the social circles will allow. They don't push the boundaries beyond where they perceive the Overton window to be. And it's usually far, far more restricted than maybe you or I would ever actually think, or the American people would tolerate. This sort of stuff busts those myths. I mean, party after party came in for decades promising to try and control the American border and fix immigration. It was just a lie. It was a myth. It wasn't something that anyone ever actually did. And it was presented as just being far too complicated to actually have an impact. Well, in his first term, Trump proved that wrong. And in his first term, Joe Biden proved the disastrous effects of returning to the old way. Now you see it where it used to be a backburner issue. People didn't care about it as much. Now it's an 80% issue. Republicans and Democrats are in favor of deporting criminals, and even Democrats in the small majority are in favor of deporting sometimes people who are here illegally who've committed offenses. This combination, led by the example of an actually strong leader, it was going to have an impact on D.C., and it'll be hard to forget it.
Well, Bedford, thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
See you then.
Matthew, as you guys were talking there, it just makes me think of the mandate. This is why this is here right now in this moment. And I look at it and all the memes online and everybody's like, wow, they have power. They're actually using it. And the meme is like, more, right? The guys out there, they feel this, like the taste of blood is in their mouth finally. And they go, oh, wow, we can actually use this. We can do something.
Yes, we have to remember the mandate comes from the people. So the idea that this is tyrannical to use power to do what the people want to do, at some point it becomes nonsensical. Of course, there's something called tyranny, a corruption, and then there's the right use of power. But there's nothing wrong with the right use of power. That is how the people rule, right? You have to have governance. And so when the mandate is what comes from the people, what they're giving to Trump and saying, please use this and save our country, and then to actually see a politician pick that baton up and start using it in ways that are really commonsensical, but not to Republican leadership, it's refreshing. And I think what Chris said is right. I think this first week is going to, it's in the lessons, it's like a lesson for politicians for the next couple decades, that it just blew open that window and people realize, oh, wow, yeah, this is real. We actually have to govern.